Hi guys, Charles here with Charles Henriksen Music, and in today's video we're going to give you the lowdown on the all-new Henriksen Forte. So I've had this amp now since last Friday. It's now Sunday, so I've had it sort of 9 days-ish. I've been sort of holding off just to give a review and a count on it until I've had a chance to have a proper play. I still don't feel I've had a full play, but I really wanted to just give you my first impressions. And just to summarise, I've been absolutely blown away by this amp, so stay tuned and I'm going to talk you through all of the features. So I'll run you through the top panel, I'll run you through the controls available here, but just to give a quick... So, first of all, to give a brief background about Henriksen. Henriksen are an American brand known for making the jazz amp. And the jazz amp is sort of the spiritual successor to the micro brute, the polytone. And it's become a very commonly seen amp amongst jazz players. Now, it is a solid state amp, the jazz amp, which is part of its appeal. It's ridiculously powerful and loud in a very small square format. The Henriksen Forte, therefore, is the result, according to their website, of starting to experiment with valves and tubes and all that fun stuff. So I am by no means an expert in this stuff, but as far as I'm aware, this is a 12AX7 tube in the preamp section of this Forte, and the power amp is, as far as I'm aware, the Henriksen power amp that you would find in the jazz amp. Now, the reason I'm saying as far as I'm aware and all this stuff is because there isn't actually a huge amount of information out there on this amplifier, on the internet, on the official website as well. A lot of the stuff I've got from their forums and the discussions there from people who presumably know a lot more than me. What I've sort of gathered by that research is this is very similar to the preamp you'd find in a twin reverb, is the sort of thing they're going for with this. Now, don't hold me to that, but that's the sort of vibe you can expect from this amp. So let's quickly run down some of the features that we've got available to us here with the amp, and then we'll get down to hearing the playing, of course. So on the top panel here, I will show you I'll put an image up on the screen. We've got a very small input gain control, which I thought was a switch, but it is actually a pot. We then have a 5-band graphic EQ, 60, 250, 750, 2.5 and 6.5K. We then have the sort of the special feature of this amp, which is the saturation control, which is sitting nicely next to our nicely glowing valve there. So we've got the saturation control. We then have a 2-band bass and treble EQ, followed by digital reverb and our master volume. Right at the very end, we've got the line out, which I'll talk about in a second. Now, like I say, there's not a huge amount of information out there on this amp, so I'm assuming, and I may be wrong, I'm assuming that the graphic EQ is part of the preamp, and the bass and treble pots are part of the power amp. That seems to be the way it's functioning with me sort of fiddling about with it for a week. But yeah, I think the graphic EQ is on the way in, and the bass and treble pot are on the way out as part of the power amp. So with regards to this review or this this first impression, what you're going to be hearing, of course, you're hearing my Kiesel, which is these are pretty hot pickups, really. They are passive, but they are the Holdsworth lithium pickups. They've got a pretty hot output. They're not extreme, but they're not sort of vintage style. I'm running into the input of the amp, obviously. I forgot to mention there is also a TRS effects loop here, just below the input. I'm running into the input of the amp. I'm then going through and you're hearing both the amp in the room, which sounds like this. It's also the amp you're hearing, sorry, it's also the microphone you're hearing my voice through. And we're also hearing the DI, which is coming out the right hand side of the amp here. No effects, no nothing, all you're hearing is the DI. Now for the video, unless I say otherwise, you're going to be hearing sort of my blend of those two, which I think is where this amp really comes into its own, especially in the studio. So really, the amp is designed for cleans. It's designed for cleans. It is a jazz amp. Like we can see though, we've got this beautiful valve on the top, and I will play with that in a moment. But let's just hear a bit of tone. This is everything set at neutral, no saturation, input gain at about 50%. The bass, all the EQs are set at a center point, no reverb, and the volume pot starts completely off. It points at about 7 o'clock if it were a clock face. I've got it at about 8 o'clock, okay? And here's what that sounds like. So really usable clean there, both I would say on stage and in a studio context. You know, there's plenty you could do with that. So now let's start talking about the fun stuff, which of course is the saturation control. That's where this amp really comes into its own. So it is incredibly subtle, guys, incredibly subtle. But I'm going to turn the saturation, again, it starts at about 7 o'clock if it were a clock face. I'm going to start by turning it to about 9 o'clock, okay? I doubt you're initially going to hear much of a difference. I said there, I doubt you're going to hear much of a difference, but actually, I noticed a really big difference there. I'm playing the amp louder than I have been, because of course I'm a considerate neighbour, but I'm just quickly shooting this video, so my neighbour, and it's midday, so the neighbours can tolerate it for half an hour or so. But just driving that master output a little bit hotter than I have been this week, that saturation's made a bit more of a difference. The saturation starts to take you towards that Fender twang. So no saturation at all. We're dealing with a jazz amp, and already there we're just pointing the saturation dial to 9 o'clock. We're starting to move into country territory. I'm going to boost that up to halfway, the saturation. Saturation doesn't particularly affect the volume, guys. It's not a gain pot. It's really, again, I'd love to know exactly what's going on here, but the documentation isn't available. I'm wondering if maybe it's more of a wet-dry control on the valve, and almost more like an overdrive pedal would be. And we're still hearing the jazz amp, but we're dialing in the wet valve signal. So here's the valve at about 12 o'clock. Bridge pickup. we're starting to bark a little bit there. It's starting to quack. 3 o'clock, so this is nearly all the way. Back to the neck pickup. And all the way up with the saturation. Okay, now you can hopefully get a sense of what that saturation is doing. I'm going to put that back to about 50% saturation, and we're going to turn our attention towards the reverb. So reverb's been off the whole time, so that you can tune your ear into the reverb, what it sounds like. I'm going to go the opposite direction, so I'm going to give us full reverb. We can hear how the reverb sounds, and we're going to dial it down. Now, my older brother has a jazz amp, one of the older models, and he's never been very happy with the reverb on it. But I think the reverb on this is a significant step up. It almost has, at full, it's almost like it's got an octave shimmer going on, you know, like the mash pad on the Hall of Fame reverb. So here's full reverb, half saturation. Okay, I'll dial that down to about halfway. That's not overbearing. I've heard Joe Pass using a similar amount of reverb back in the day, but it's a tiny bit too much for me, so I'm going to dial it down to about 9 o'clock, which is slightly less than a third of the reverb available, and I think this is where I've been using it most of the time. So I'm not going to go into the EQ section today because, well, it's just EQ, you know. But that's everything at middle. Now, I do just want to briefly talk about some pros and cons. So the pros, the things I love about this amp, first of all, it's so lightweight. I couldn't believe it when the delivery guy left the box here and I picked it up. You'll possibly, I'll show you maybe now, I'll insert a bit of an unboxing for people who like that. Just while I'm blabbering on about the pros and cons. So, really, really light, which of course for a gigging working musician is absolutely fantastic. I just love the sound of it. It's such a detailed, three-dimensional sound. The other thing, which is brilliant for me as a cat owner, which is a bit of a weird one, is the front is not fabric. It is, I think it's plastic, but it might be metal. A metal grill on the front. Anyone with a cat knows that they love to get their claws into the grill on the front and scratch their claws on it. Next thing I love about it is it looks really cool. Of course, the logo glowing on the front and the valve glowing on the top is brilliant. Now, into more important things, sound-wise, it's got a beautiful, beautiful tone. Really, really 3D. The saturation, I really love this. It keeps it clean, but it makes it easier to play. It's like using a distortion pedal, but you can't hear the distortion. It really makes those legato phrases so easy for a clean tone, as far as clean tones go, you know. Now, I think the reason that it makes it so easy is because it makes it more dynamic, makes the amp more dynamic. So even the tiniest sounds come through lovely. The built-in reverb's a really usable sound as well, which is great. So you're almost getting a sort of free reverb pedal with this. The other things I love about this amp is the DI is such a great sound. Now, it's not the same as hearing the amp in the room, but it's really a very fair representation. I'd say it gives you sort of 60% of the effect of having the amp in the room, which is really useful in some environments. You know, you could run this through a PA. If the amp wasn't loud enough in the room, you could run it straight into a recording desk and take that sound, which, you know, a good engineer would be able to use that very comfortably. And the final pro, really, I mean, there's many others, but it goes so loud. Like I say, I'm the volume fully off points at 7 o'clock. I've been playing it no more than 8 o'clock, and turning it all the way up, the room shakes. I mean, I haven't been able to get it all the way up. So I'm afraid I can't demonstrate that for you because I'm in an apartment, but it goes ridiculously loud. I'm going to be getting this out and about and looking forward to really opening it up volume wise on a jam or something like that. Okay, now in terms of the cons are really, you know, it's a clean amp. So if you're not into cleans, if you want a driven tone, it's possibly not the right amp for you. However, it does have the effects loop, and I think with a boost pedal, I will do a video at some point using a boost or an overdrive pedal in the front of this. I think it's going to take it really, really nicely. Either that just edge of breakup stuff or screaming leads, I think they're going to translate really, really nicely through this amp. So, of course, it doesn't have that in it, but if you already have distortion or drive pedals or boosts, get them in it and it's going to sound unbelievable. You've got such a usable tone already that really you'd have to have some pretty awful gear to subtract from that. The next thing, really, these are 2 points in one. There's no user manual. So on the website, there is a user manual section of the website, but there's nothing there to download. So I thought, oh, well, I'll just wait till it arrives in the post. And it didn't come with the user manual either. So that's a bit of a shame because, like I said, 2 points in one here, there's no numbers on the top of the amp, with the exception of the graphic EQ where it does tell you the frequency bands. I don't know the decibel range of these controls. I don't know whether they're linear. I don't know the way it's working. And like I say, I'm not sure whether the graphic EQ is part of the preamp and the bass treble 2-band EQ is part of the power amp. I'm assuming that's how it is, but I don't really know. If you're someone who likes to set a tone really accurately, really dial a tone in, and wants to be able to remember that, maybe take a photo of the top of the amp, because if anything gets knocked, you're maybe going to struggle to remember, or it was on 5 or anything like that. You'll notice for today's video, I've just been using the clock face method. And really, that's it. That's the only cons that I've come across. So sorry if you're disappointed if you want a bad review. To sum it all up, guys, it's an absolutely stunning amp, and I'm absolutely delighted with it. I'm really excited to get playing this. I think it's really going to sort of take my playing to the next level. So without any further ado, I'll maybe just play us out. And if you've got any questions about the amp, anything you want to hear from it, leave a comment down below. I know there's not much content online about this amp, and I'll get to it as soon as I can. In the meantime, have a great week, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Cheers.